So what I thought I would do is actually start by outlining who's over here, right? I don't know if you've seen this, but this is you. So talk a little bit about who the participants are and where are you in your businesses. Portfolio. Okay. So half of you have revenues between 0 and 10 crores, so less than 10 crores. About a third of you have revenues between 10 and 50 crores. 10% are over 50, but less than 150, and then there is another 10% that is over 150 crores. So it's actually quite a range of companies, and one thing that I have to always commend Harsh Bhai on is that he's managed to get all of you together to learn from each other. ASCENT Foundation, I think, is a fabulous initiative to get all sort of entrepreneurs to come together and actually share what challenges they are facing with each other. And the reason why that's important, and this is one thing that personally I've been an entrepreneur 3 times. Nexus is my 3rd venture, and entrepreneurship as such is a very lonely journey, particularly if you are the only person starting a company and running with it, right? I've been always fortunate that I've always started a company with a partner, never just by myself. But in your cases, many of you are doing this by yourself. So having these groups, your trust groups, is actually fabulous in terms of just helping. Some of you may actually be here. Your trust group partners are not here. So what I'm sharing over here, I will actually make the presentations already there with Archana and the team. Feel free to share it with the rest of your group, and just anybody that needs information about fundraising and all, there's stuff there. Again, companies range from various sort of age groups. But interestingly, the thing that I found very interesting about this group is it's a pretty mature group. So very few companies in that 0 to 2 sort of level. Most of the people have been around for a while. And I've actually seen both ups and downs and how to grow the business. The other interesting thing is it's mostly self-funded businesses. So if you look at, I actually count family and friends as self, because ultimately you're taking the responsibility with those guys to get them their money back, right? So it's effectively you. So if I take those 3 into account, almost 80% of the companies here are self-funded businesses. So it's actually, for me, I'm saying, okay, these are people who are for the first time thinking about raising external capital. What does that mean? And some of the things that I'll talk about will be in that context. Again, a variety of industries, as the way ASCENT is set up. This is not surprising that they've actually chosen to bring people from different backgrounds into a trust group, so you get perspectives from different industries. There's no competitive issue and so on. So this is as expected. Again, range of businesses, about a third are manufacturing, half are services, some are trading. Move on. And interestingly, finally, the funding requirements. So if you look at the amount of money at a different size of the organization, it's I don't know how to read that combined thing, but as the companies grow, people are thinking about more debt financing than equity financing. As you're smaller, you're thinking more about equity financing. And the financing requirements actually, again, interestingly, obviously the larger companies need loan more money, and they will probably end up taking more debt. So again, when I looked at this, my sense was that there's not too much capital being asked for. It's because you guys are already running existing businesses. You're basically saying, okay, do I need capital for working cap? Do I need it to start a new business or new line? In some cases, the discussion is around, do I need to put more money into R&D to improve my existing product? So those were the kind of things that sort of came up in the context of why the capital is required. So I've put that in mind in terms of how I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've sort of seen over the last 20 years that I've been investing in companies in India. And what Ashna, then she had also sent me from the survey a list of questions that are there in your minds. So I'm going to make it a little bit more interactive. I'll use the questions to sort of put answers out there. Feel free to stop me at any of these questions. If you want further clarifications, feel free to, this is a boot camp, it's not a presentation. So please feel free to ask any questions at any point and stop me. So starting point is, when is the right time to raise funds? And in particular, funds through equity. So as Harshna was saying, I think with one of you, the question is, hey, I'm seeing my business is growing, I see great opportunities in front of me, I don't have enough capital to capture that. Right? So that's the fundamental reason why an entrepreneur says that I need capital. There will sometimes when you say you need capital because you are struggling, but in most cases, you are looking for capital when there are growth opportunities in front of you and there is not enough internal accruals to cover that. The second thing which I fundamentally believe in the Indian entrepreneurial context is you have to have built that mental mind frame to say, I'm ready to share the returns of my hard work with the person providing the capital. It's a mind shift, right? So far, you've always sort of, whatever hard work you put in, all of the returns of that were coming to you as an entrepreneur, right? Now all of a sudden, I've heard this word being used, sleeping partner, right? This is a very common thing. I have a sleeping partner. What is a sleeping partner? A sleeping partner is typically a person who's provided you with funds and is not actively involved in your business. Capital can be seen that way. That capital is a sleeping partner, what value is it bringing me? And in many cases, the problem that you run into is if you don't think of capital as an active partner, and at some point there can be resentment that comes in, that I'm giving away so much sort of value to my capital partner, what are they doing for me? So the first thing is get comfortable with the idea that you will be sharing your returns of all your work with the partner who's providing you capital. The third thing, which is also very important, is you should have a clear path to liquidity for that partner. Particularly when you're doing when you're working with institutional investors, right? So I'm assuming all of you are over here, you would have raised money from friends and family, right? That's different. But if you're raising money from an institutional investor, could be an angel investor. Doesn't need to be an institution, it could be an angel investor, but that angel investor is investing as an investor, but that's their business, right? That they're investing, they're trying to expect a return. So an investor at some point will expect liquidity. They are not in this, just to give you money and see you grow, but they want to see some returns out of that. So you have to have a clear path that if I am taking, 100 rupees from someone, how am I going to give that back to them? Is it going to be an IPO? Is it going to be dividends? I'm going to buy them out with some guaranteed return or whatever else, right? So very clear vision on how that liquidity will come, will come for the investor. Just a quick thing that on debt versus equity. So typically you would want to raise debt if you are relatively certain of your cash flows. If you know that if I grow, this is the kind of cash flow I'll see. If you're an existing business, you're already doing 150 crores in revenue, you're profitable. It may be easier to take money from a bank than raise equity. I see a lot of people saying, oh, I don't want to raise money for debt because it puts pressure on me. So that, the mental freedom of, oh, I have covenants from the bank, I'll have to deal with those, I have to meet certain, current liquidity requirements and all that stuff. So I don't want to take money as debt because it puts pressure on me, I'll take equity. That is the wrong thinking. Because what is it that you've just done, right? That goes back to the point I just brought up. You're not ready to share the returns with your investor. You're thinking of the capital there. I think equity is just something that you put on the sidelines. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. That is not the way to think about this. An equity investor may not have the covenants. They may not have the same ability to take you to bankruptcy court or whatever else. But their expectation on returns are higher than a bank's expectations. You can get a bank to give you a loan at 10%, 12%. A minimum equity return that somebody expects is at least 20%, if not more. So mentally, I actually would say that the pressure of taking money from an equity investor should be the same as taking pressure, taking the pressure on debt. So again, from a thinking mindset, that's very important. But there are situations when you don't have certainty on cash flows. You're entering a new business line, you don't know where it's going to go, how long will it take to scale up, how will customers sort of react to it, and so on. Sometimes, the capital that you're deploying, if you're in a services business, is around working capital, that gets tied up and so on. So how do you actually manage that? If you don't have assets to give to a bank, right? You don't want to give a personal guarantee, all that stuff. So then, sometimes you don't have a choice but to go for equity. So, in those situations, that's when you sort of say, okay, instead of debt, I'll take equity. The last point is, again, I think goes back to this point about sharing returns. You also have to be open with the equity investor, particularly when taking equity, that they will in some way or the other get involved with your business decisions. Because they don't have covenants, a bank, bank manages through covenants. They will basically say, you can't have your current ratio go down below this level. If you do, you have to put more money into the business or whatever else, or they'll take margin money or they'll take bank guarantees from you and so on, right? Personal guarantees or whatever else. Equity guy doesn't have that. So how does the equity guy manage, equity investor manage their, or have some control over that the money will come back. So if they think that the business is not going in the right direction, they'll come to you and say, do this, do that, all of that. So you have to have that sort of openness to expect the equity investor to sort of say, okay, I want to do this or do that in your business. So the question that that sort of comes out of that is, if you are taking money from equity and not debt. So like I said, the starting point is if you can afford to take debt, I always say that do that because it's lower cost of capital. But there is value to actually bringing an equity investor on board that goes beyond capital. And I think that's when you start thinking about not taking debt versus taking equity, and be willing to pay the extra sort of return profile that an equity investor wants. And those end up being the following, right? So the first is basically, can the equity investor add strategic value to your business? So if you are running a consumer business, let's say, and Harshbhai's family foundation is willing to give money, you would say it makes sense because you may have access to Harshbhai, you have access to it through ASCENT Foundation, but let's say people who are not in the ASCENT Foundation, right? They can approach a family office of a person like Harshbhai or others who have a consumer mindset and say, please give me money, but more than money, what I really want is a strategic value that you bring in how to grow my business, how do I scale it, and so on, right? So that applies for various industries. You can go and get an investor from a manufacturing industry who's maybe had been a CEO of a large company and say, I don't necessarily want that much money from you. You can give me 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs, but what I really want from you is your time and I want your insight. So that's the first value that an equity investor can provide. The second is equity investor, as I said, or when you take investment, the big shift that happens is on corporate governance. So some people actually can do it earlier, and I'll talk about how do you prepare yourself for taking investment. But the biggest change that happens is there is an expectation that you would actually be governed through a board. So I don't know how many of you have boards in your companies today? One. Why have the others not set up boards? So I actually would urge each of you to think about setting up boards in your companies. And I'll tell you why there is value to having a board. So when you're running your business, you are first and foremost, as I said, entrepreneurship is a very lonely journey. So you are actually the only person who's sort of, building a business and so on. In your trust groups, you've effectively created an informal board without realizing it. So you will come to your trust group and you will have a discussion around key issues that you're facing and so on. I don't know how much data do you share within your trust groups, but that's where a board plays a big value, right? So a board is basically there with you, has information about what you're doing, and can actually be your thought partner. So whether you take money from them, whether it's always valuable to have a set of people who are involved in your business as thought partners and can be, effectively, provide you with governance without necessarily coming in the way. So it could be, I'm not suggesting that it has to be, the CEO of Hindustan Lever has to be on your board, but my point is that get value-added people to come and work with you and create a board structure wherever possible. The third thing is it helps you with hiring professionals. So one of the biggest challenges I see, and one of the biggest reasons why I have sort of mid-sized companies approach us for funding at Nexus is we are unable to hire professionals. Nobody wants to come and join a promoter-led business because they don't think that this is, they don't know whether it will be professionally run or not. So there is sort of it's interesting, but they're sort of seen as a marker that if you bring external investment from a professional investor, could be a fund, could be a family office, but if there's a professional investor on board of your company, a professional feels more comfortable about joining that company. And so if you're thinking about building your team, there's value to having a professional investor on board. Now, going back to the point I raised about the board, if you have the right board in place, that also helps. So in terms of building your team and bringing professionals on board, having a professional board may be a starting point of building that team. The third, as I said, is basically, you get thought partnership from the investor. And the final thing is that, the investor is always thinking in line of value creation. So there is a certain discipline that comes into decision making in an organization when there is an investor on board. It's as I said in the earlier slide, that it's a plus and minus. You will get, if I come onto your board as an investor, I will get involved in making sure that whatever you do is creating value in some way. If I feel that you're just sort of, blowing the money away, I come and say, why are you doing this? Right? So that today, as the sole karta dharta of your business, you don't have to worry about that. Let's try it, yeah, it'll work, it doesn't work, no problem, right? That's okay. But once you have an investor on board, that discipline becomes very laser focused. So that's, you have something that you have to sort of keep in mind. But that's where there's value add as well. So talk a little bit about this. The question was, what are some of the things you should be prepared for before getting an equity investor on board? This goes back to the first slide, the first question that was asked. So the first thing is, how many of you are doing this by yourself versus having a co-founder or on board? How many of you are sole entrepreneurs? So not that many. So most of you have a partner that you're working with, which is great, right? So how did you choose your partner? How did you decide to work with someone? Anybody, any thoughts?
My husband.
It's your husband, okay? Then it's you. You guys are one. So outside of spousal relationships, has anybody chosen a partner to work with?
Someone who shares a vision and someone adds some values those I don't have.
Okay. Now, did you start the business before you were married or after you were married?
Just before.
Just before, okay. So you weren't married when you started the business, okay. Huh.
He's my partner today.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose it because he was system process tech savvy.
Yeah.
And
Great.
of course
So you said I am not and he is, so let's work together.
And he's related to me also.
Okay.
That was not the reason.
So my primary reason was you saw that there was a different set of skills that he brought to helping you build the business.
Be more analytical and
When you these guys decided, but when you guys decided to partner, did you also think about what would you do if things went wrong? Obviously, you went all the way, so I can't. But anybody else, that had partners, how, did you ever sort of, when you got into the partnership, before you got into the partnership, did you guys think about what would happen if something goes wrong? Did not, or did?
We found the needs.
You read founder agreements, yeah? Okay.
So we didn't think, but now we did.
Okay. So post fact, right? So I think the biggest thing is in the case is very similar, right? So I think one of the things that we do is, particularly with businesses, in many times you say, let's start this together. Interesting space, as you were saying that same vision. You guys, would just be having dinner sometime or coffee, and this idea came up. This problem is there. Oh, really? Yeah, I'm also struggling with the same problem. Let's start and do something about it, right? So a lot of businesses end up getting started because you have a common vision and you build a business, but you don't think about, you actually thought about what are the differences, skill sets that you bring. In some cases you don't, and in most cases you don't think about how would you manage if things don't work out. That's the beauty about entrepreneurship, is it's internal optimism, right? You're going in. If you did not have that optimism, you won't be able to start a business, right? So fundamentally, it's the optimism that everything will work out, which prevents you from even thinking about, unless somebody sort of advised you. Probably somebody advised you, let's have a founder agreement in place, right? But in most cases, people don't even think about it, because when you get into that relationship, you're not thinking about what can go wrong, because you're an optimist, right? That's why you're doing this together. It's the same thing, today in India at least, arranged marriages is fundamentally about eternal optimism, right? Unlike the US or other markets where there are prenup agreements, we don't do any prenups. For the simple reason we think it'll work out. So it's the same thing with entrepreneurship and partnership. Now, take that one step further, and you're saying, I'm going to do the same thing with the investor. Okay? So, that investor has to be thought about as another co-founder or as another partner in your business. So, when you're thinking about bringing an investor on board, think of it that way. What is that investor bringing? Like you said, he brought an analytical mindset and a systems process mindset to the business to make it successful. So you have to also think about it the same way, that what is that investor bringing to my business? How will it make me more successful? It's not just about capital. The investment relationship is equally sticky as any of your operating partnerships. It's very hard to get out of an investing relationship. Like, buyouts get very messy, all of those things happen, right? So when you're going in again with your optimism, you'll say, it doesn't matter who the investor is, we'll make it all work, right? But it's very important to be thoughtful and say, this is what this investor is bringing to the table. This is why I think, my chemistry works with this investor. They are the right partner because they understand this industry that I'm in, or whatever else, right? So very important. What I also said was this willingness to share the upside fairly. The other thing that you should have clarity on is an overarching vision with clear milestones. Before you bring when you're running your business right now, at this point, you guys are probably, stuck in the day-to-day business. There are 20 decisions to be taken every day. When do you take time out to actually think about where will I be 5 years from now? Where will I be 10 years from now? Right? So, before you get into investment discussion with any investor, take the time out to actually say, where do I see myself? Where do I see this business? At different milestones. Where am I 1 year out? Where am I 3 years out? Where am I 5 years out? Where will this be 10 years away, right? So, depending on the stage of where you are in your business and how you see, scaling up, it allows you to actually communicate your sort of need for funds with anybody that you're speaking to. It allows you to also step back and say, what kind of investment do I want? It allows you to say, how much money do I want? It allows you to say, do I want equity? Do I want debt, right? So I think all of those things start from the fact that you have to have a very clear overarching vision of what you are building and what's the milestones to make it happen. Okay. The second thing that comes out of that, as you get closer to raising funds, is you need to have a directional business plan. To be able to say, okay, if this is my vision, how am I going to achieve it? What is my, how many people will I need? What type of organization will I need to build? What will I have to invest in plant and equipment? What is the working capital requirement that I might need for the next year or 2 years, right? So depending on the horizon that you've defined for yourself, typically what I see is, entrepreneur should look for at least an 18 to 24 month window of funding. Give yourself at least that period of time, so that you don't have to come back and raise more money 6 months later or 9 months later, because typical cycle of fundraising is about 6 months. From the time that you go and say, I want to raise money in the market, to the time you actually will get the money, the average time period. So it won't happen tomorrow. So you have to, if you're getting money in 4 to 6 months, then raise money with a plan for at least 18 to 24 months. Because if you raise money for a year, then 6 months into the fundraise, you would be coming back to market to raise money for the next fundraise, right? So therefore, if you have 18 to 24 months, you have enough time to actually show that the last time you raised funds, it actually worked. So the next time you go and raise funds, it's easier to raise funds. And the final point in terms of how to be prepared is to have a robust MIS. One of the biggest challenges that we see with companies that have already been in existence for a while, and when they come to raise money, is when you start asking questions to do due diligence, to understand what their cash flows look like, what their business looks like. The numbers aren't there. Or the numbers are there, but not in a manner which is easy to follow. So then, what ends up happening is we say, okay, you have to recast your numbers, work with accounting firm or whatever else, do it. But it takes away time, right? In that period of time. And as investors, I'm probably getting, 10 proposals a day for investment. And I'm getting 10, my colleagues are getting, 10. So between just Nexus, right, we'll probably be getting at least 20, 30 proposals a day, just to give you a sense. Right? So we probably end up getting 5,000, proposals a year. Now the question is, and we invest in 8 companies a year. And this is true for all the large institutional investors. We're all running with that issue. So when you come to us and you are not prepared, we say, okay, prepare yourself. But for me, I've moved on. Right? I'm already, so the next guy has come. So whoever is most prepared is likely to get more time from me, because I can just get into the business very quickly, right? So I think preparation, therefore, the robust MIS is very important. And I said, if you can get your board structures in place, in corporate governance in place, secretarial filings and all that have happened, compliance is happening, all of that stuff. It just makes it easier, because I'm basically saying, okay, you already have a board in mind. You already are working with the board. So if I come and join you as a board member, I take less risk, right? Because the other thing about private companies when they raise money is, if I'm coming on the board, I'm effectively taking risk as a board member. So if I already have comfort that there's a board structure in place, it makes it easier for me to sort of say, okay, yeah, this company already has a structure in place, let's come on. I just want to stop. Any questions at this point? Yeah?
Actually, I have one. You mentioned... Thank you so much for the insight. You mentioned a couple of times how important it is to have a board. And this is the first time that I'm really thinking about it very strongly, in the last few months. And it's a big doubt, like, how do you choose a board, and what are the commercials, and how does that thing happen, between you and a board member?
Yeah.
How do you handle that relationship? What kind of a relationship? If you can just give a little bit of input on that, it would be great.
Good. So just put that as a question, I'll answer that question. It's not there in the slide, but I'll answer that question. Yeah.
Maybe you need to add also the advisory board
And the statutory board, yeah.
So at the size of 50 to 70 crores, is the right time to bring in the board member, and whether they will be interested in our size of company or probably.
Okay. So, yeah, how to think about a board? That's one. What else? Any other questions? Everybody, I think a lot of people raised their hands, so everybody had the same question, looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
The first question you were talking about was the vision. And currently, now that our businesses are growing,
you have to come in.
Speak a little louder. We basically, how do you crystallize your vision as a company? Because when you're growing a family business, you're running the day-to-day affairs.
Correct.
So how do you then move on to building the vision? So could you share some
Okay.
insight?
Yeah.
There is a question for robust MIS for which you are ready. So apart from the business, main line of business, what will be the financial ratio which they will be looking for?
Okay.
The question will come from the financial ratio.
From ratios, okay.
Financials.
Yeah.
My question is, so we started as a startup from university and with the grants money, and now we are looking at a combination of debt and equity. Is it possible to have the shift from debt equity to later only equity part? So is there that transition feasible, or once you enter to debt, you continue with the debt, or you enter to equity, it's mandatory to continue with equity? Is such correlation that exists?
Yes. Yeah, I can hear you.
How will investor look at expenses for future growth, which will not have an impact immediately?
Yeah.
It will have a stay on my P&L. It will dent my cash flow.
Yeah.
But I may have a probability.
Yeah.
So there will be a probability of scaling up. How is it, or what would be an ideal mix of
Yeah.
those
So,
kind of
okay.
costs?
So I'll answer that question. I have this question around evaluation of businesses. How do we look at it? So in that I'll cover that point. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so how often do you meet the board and do we have to pay the board members?
So the same question. How do you think about compensating the board and all that stuff? Yeah. So maybe I'll answer the question around the board, right? Because I think that's an important topic. As Harshbhai was saying, boards can be structured in two ways. So you can have a statutory board where effectively they are, reported with the MCA, you file your, Form 24s and all that stuff that are required. And they are actually board members that will help you, take decisions. But and they will have the risk associated with that. Right? So they are, and the second is an advisory board. An advisory board could potentially function the same way as a board, except they're, as the name suggests, they're just in the form of advisors. They're not taking any statutory responsibility. So typically, it's easier to constitute an advisory board for the reason that the person is not taking any liability. The advisory board structure will normally involve, it depends from situation to situation. Some honorarium if the person has that structure in place already and they don't want to do it otherwise. But a lot of people will be open to doing it for some small amount of equity. And the equity is in points, not in it's less than 1%, it's like could be 0.1% or depending on what scale of business you are at, right? So if you are running a very large business, then you give a few shares. If you are, HUL, the guy will get, maybe 100 shares of HUL, which could be worth, in the grand scheme of things, 0.00001% of HUL, right? So it depends on what scale of business do you have as to how much equity you would give that person, right? The equity grant to a board member, interestingly, can be thought of in the same way as a grant to or a purchase by an investor. Because when you're talking to that person, you're saying, okay, I'm giving you this equity, I'm giving you 100 shares. The question is, how much are they worth? Right? So this whole discussion on valuation comes up. So, I'll talk a little bit about valuation. So, but the idea is that whatever equity you're giving them will be worth a lot more by their involvement. And so therefore you are willing to give it because, you are going to make much more out of their partnership with you or their relationship with you than what you're losing by giving them equity, right? So it goes back to the same point that you're effectively having somebody come on your board and work with you, and you're fairly sharing some, parts of your efforts. So it's very important to get the right people on board. So at least at the start, at the stage that you guys are at, I would say these are people that you have worked with in some construct in the past, and you know them well enough. So this could be somebody that may have been one of, the CEOs of one of your large customers and has since then retired. Right? So they know you, you know them, they've been your champions in the past. So there could be a large customer that is no longer at that customer, right? So if that person is no longer going to be, see, you don't want to take a board member who is a customer, right? Because then they know what your business is, right? So it has to be somebody that is no longer doing business with you, but you know well and they know you well, right? So they know your business. So that's one potential option. Second is, you may have people within your network itself, right? So there are people over here who may be very good in one area, and that area can be very useful for you. You can bring them, so as I said, your ASCENT trust groups are effectively informal advisory boards in a structured way that got created because of ASCENT. But, you can have so a friend of mine runs a large jewelry company. So he had a statutory board. He had 3 investors in the company who were there on the thing, and as the company grew, he felt that the investors could no longer, really be helpful. They were there for capital, they didn't really understand the space that well, and so on, and then there were some issues around. So one of them came from the industry, and there were some issues around how do you manage that relationship. So about a year and a half back, he actually created an advisory board, and the advisory board, he brought on a consumer expert, somebody who had actually been a very senior executive at Unilever and then at Godrej. He brought on a very sort of senior finance person, so somebody who had been a partner at Deloitte, and he brought on somebody that really understood, so had been a partner with a investment firm. So so these 3 people, and then I think there are 2 more, advisory board of 5. And interestingly, other than the gentleman who came from a consumer background, the other people were all people he knew. So no equity taken. So no equity, no compensation. It was just done because, hey, we want to help you out. Right? They meet once a quarter. The value that my friend found was that the preparation for that once a quarter meeting brought up so many interesting ideas, because you had to step back from the business and really think about, what is it that I want to ask my advisory board? What are the questions that I want to ask this gentleman on consumer issues? What are the things that I want to understand? How do I improve my financials, right? The finance guy. So what it did was the preparation of that. Maybe it was 2 days of work, right? He literally got everybody in his team to say, send me all your key questions and so on. But that preparation brought up so many points that was as important as the advisory board discussion, right? Because you otherwise don't have any reason to step away from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. This is effectively your trust group meeting. If you prepare for it, is the same thing. So I'm part of IPO, right? So same thing, that we have to do these monthly meetings, just thinking through, and it's the same structure, right? So you talk about your business, you talk about your personal life, you talk about yourself, your family life, and you talk about yourself. Just thinking through what you want to discuss with your trust group forces you to say what's happening that's good, what's happening that's not good, right? It just creates a framework in which you can put your last month into perspective and think about your following month, right? So that's the value which you guys, probably after you do it for a while, you take it for granted. But it's a tremendous value, and the same value can be brought to business with these, either a statutory board or an advisory board. So going back to your question, compensation, like I said, could be a small honorarium. As the company grows, the expectations change, because at a very large company stage, the amount of effort that a board member may need to put in is more. It's also what you expect from the board member. If it's a once a quarterly meeting, it's less of an issue versus saying I want to take 2 hours of your time every fortnight. Then the person will expect more compensation. So it's also thinking about how will you use the board member, in what context. Is this person almost a daily thought partner, or is this a person that I reach out to once in a while to just run by some idea? So as I said, so one is clearly there are people who play these roles. So you can actually get consultants who will join advisory boards, but those are for compensatory reasons. The difference is that they do it in companies where they think that they are also learning. So in many cases you'll find, like for example, this partner who joined the advisory board, he did not have any prior experience with jewelry, but he was obviously a very good guy at accounts and all that stuff. So for him, the thing that he liked was the fact that by being involved in this, he was getting exposure to a different industry. So that's how he said, I don't need the money, I'm just doing this because I'm learning something. At this age, he's I think 58 or 60, he says, I don't need the money, I just want to learn something new. So there are people who actually just want to be involved in doing interesting things. And some of them may actually be in your network. So it's finding those people. And I would say starting an advisory board or a statutory board, at this stage of the company, one or two people I would say as a minimum. 2 to 3, I would not make it too large because as it becomes large, it's very hard to manage them also. To schedule time with them, get them into a room is also, these people, if they're doing other things, it's not easy. So making sure that you keep it to a manageable level at the start is helpful. The difference between your trust group and the board, by the way, is that your advisory board or your statutory board is more likely to contain people from your industry. Your trust group would not have people from industry, right? That's a way it's structured. But the board that you create is more likely to have people that are from your industry, that understand the industry, that understand you, and so on, and will continue working with you. Right, did I miss anything else?
No.
Any other, on the board, anything that I want to clarify, that needs clarification? Otherwise I'll go on.
I'm just asking, how do we attract them if the senior board member you would like to have? Is it easy to actually monitor some?
How do you attract board members? Any ideas?
I think the product only can attract them the most, and how you're functioning is as a company. Like you said, it has to be a two-way thing, only then they will
So
want to come.
I think the question is that the product, let's repeat that.
I personally feel it's the product only. Like when you were saying, I was thinking what will attract them to my company. There are a lot of professors that I've studied from my college are now consultants, and they have a simple logic that whatever profit that you make after I enter, I get X % of that. So they see the growth pattern, which is very important. Product, how different is it? Is it a common product where they'll be doing the same thing, because then it becomes like a professor. You're narrating the same things in the same different boards. So when I was thinking, how do I make my attractive when he asked the same question, product, the way we function and how that Google, everybody wants to work with Google. Nothing has to attract anything, they don't have to do anything. So if you can help us understand I was thinking we should have a website where these people are available, to select. We want them, are you on panel?
So, I think there was a website being set up, I don't know if it ever happened, called secondinnings.com. I don't know if it still exists, but called secondinnings.com. That's what I remember, that people would, but I don't know if that ever sort of happened. No? Yeah?
Can I try?
Sure. And then I'll ask Rohan also, Rohan, how did you build your advisory thing at the start when you came back to India, and how did you get, like Shripad worked with you and so on, really good for you. Just talk about it.
We do have advisors who are very closely with us, and we were associated with them. They are very senior persons in the management team of TCS and content teams. I don't mind naming them. And they were associated with us even before we formed our enterprise. A. B. They found the conduct to be very open and transparent. Any board member would need very high level of transparency, very high level of purpose of your business. If you say that the purpose is restricted to the stakeholders or the owners, it's okay, you manage them, that's that approach. But if your purpose is something to do different in the market, different for the customer, larger picture for your team, for your society, and all including vendors, if you are committed to them, that is what attracts them to, and we have been going through that phase.
No, thank you. I think you brought up some very, very important points. I think transparency is a very critical point, that whether it's an advisory board or whether it is a statutory board, even more so, but the incoming person has to feel that you have a sense of transparency, right? Because they are not there in the day-to-day business. but they're taking some responsibility by being associated with you. And so they should feel comfortable that the association with you is not going to hurt their credibility or their, right? So that's a very, very important thing. That your professor will not work with you if tomorrow your company, does something wrong, right? If you are, harming the environment, then they get associated with it or whatever else, right? That's the kind of thing that they want to avoid. So the key thing is, people want to be associated, whether it's an investor, whether it is a board member, whether it is an advisor. People want to be associated with, grand visions. Right? People want to be associated with people who are making change happen. Right? So the notion over here is, at the end of the day, each of you every day are selling. Right? And I'll talk a little about what do we look for in entrepreneurs, but this is about selling to an individual to take time out of whatever else they're doing to take time with you. Right? That's the fundamental thing over here. And transparency is one, your vision is another, your ability to extract value. The other thing that you have to do is you have to be very clear as to how you will use this person. How will they add value? It's not just saying, okay, I want to have 5 people on my board. The problem that happens is you get the 5 people, then you don't use them. Even if you give them equity, the funny part is that I've seen people actually return the equity, saying, hey, there was no value to being on your board. I didn't learn anything. I didn't do anything. I feel guilty about this equity, that holding this equity. So people just return it. So I think that's a failure. If you got somebody involved with you who is choosing to return equity to you, it's a huge failure. You weren't able to actually utilize their services the way you thought about it, right? So when you go in and build a board, think about how that person will be valuable to you.
Something you want Rohan to add?
Yeah, Rohan, you want to add something?
Sure. Thanks, Sandeep. I'll talk about this a little bit later in my session, but I think to be very specific for the question is board. And I think it's as simple as what Sandeep said, it's selling, just the way you sell your product. So a very simple example, when I moved to India 5 years ago, I'm with a brand called Epigamia Greek yogurt, and the goal for us was, the first thing we do is we looked at what are the holes in the company? What can I do? What can my co-founder do? But what is the expertise that we need to plug the gaps? We can execute, but we need the advice. So we actually made a list. We made a laundry list. We needed some serious help on the brand side. We needed serious help on the production side. And we needed a little bit help on the supply chain side. So we actually made a list, and I'll just give you a simple example. We brought in a gentleman named Mustafa Dogan, who was the head of production for Chobani in the United States, which is a brand that we look up to. And it was a simple LinkedIn request. I just pounded LinkedIn 10 times until I got a response. And you'd be surprised, these people, like Sandeep mentioned, second innings, they have the expertise. I mean, it actually goes both ways. They're out there. These people exist. They're looking for things to do. And I think it's just a function of rigor and just the way you would go and sell your products to a shop. Go find those guys. But I think it has to start with what your needs are, not just I'm getting an advisor because someone told me to get one. What do I actually need to get from this guy and that I can make use of, or gal, or lady, and what can I do with that? So that's sort of my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think Rohan makes a very important point that there is actually a lot of data available on these people, on these professional networks, LinkedIn's and so on. So if you understand that this is a gap in my company that I need to fill, just go search for that on LinkedIn, and you'll find people who will be open to working with you. He found him. He's based in New York or something, right?
Yeah, Michigan.
Yeah, Michigan. Yeah, so I think getting somebody from Michigan to come and say, hey, I'm going to build a Greek yogurt company in India, is just creating that vision that there's a huge opportunity waiting over here. You did it in the US. I'm giving you an opportunity to serve 1.2 billion people in India. And the guy will say, why will I not do it, right? This is fun. People will do it, actually, it's very interesting. People will do it for fun. So these are the kind of people you want to discover, right? These are the kind of people you want to find who get excited by your vision, what you want to build, and will come on board to do that. If somebody's, as a professor is coming in as an advisor or whatever else, that's a consulting practice. But what you really want to find are people who will align with you on your vision and want to build the business with you. So, how much time do I have in this? So I'll go to some of the other stuff very quickly. So what are we looking for? There are 5 things that I always sort of, if you go and look at any of my conversations on what are things that we care about. So it's the same. So the first thing is a highly passionate promoter and team. Right? So that's the starting point. The second is you have to have a reasonably, for us, and by the way, this is for us, this is not true for all investors. Because of the size of our fund, we need to see large exits. And large exits can only happen in large markets. So for us, we are looking for people who are actually targeting very large markets. It may not be many of you may be in businesses that are focused on very, very, like you're serving Bombay, you're serving Maharashtra, in a market which is an attractive market, but which may not be a very large market. So in those scenarios, it may not be a fit for us, but that's what we look for, right? That you're targeting very large markets with some market gaps. Third is, if it's a crazily competitive market, then an investor will typically not invest, right? If there are 10 guys already playing in the market and you're the 11th person there, then investors will typically, unless you have clear market leadership, people will stay away. And you've seen that happen in multiple industries, right? So in travel, for example, after Make My Trip, Clear Trip, and Yatra sort of became big, it was very hard to find the 4th guy get funded. Because everybody said, why is there a need for a 4th guy? So the same thing is true in any cases. Then the 4th thing is basically a differentiated offering, service, product, whatever else. And not just now, but a plan to keep it differentiated going forward. So how will you make sure that, because you build something different right now, but once you get into the market, everybody knows what you built. So what is it that will prevent somebody from copying it? Or if somebody copies it, how will you stay ahead of the game? So that's the 4th thing that one looks for. And then the final thing is capital efficiency and sort of a return profile. That's the final thing. After the first 4 have been checked out, then we'll get to the bottom and say, okay, what does this mean in terms of how much capital is required, and how will you build this business for an exit? So that's the. In terms of the entrepreneur themselves, right? So that's where we started. The first thing that we look for is a passionate entrepreneur. So that's where the journey starts. If somebody comes and presents to us, they may have a great plan. They may even have a decent business. But if we don't get convinced that this person can build a $100 million business, a $200 million business, we probably won't look at it. Because the business plan can change. What you're focused on can change. You can't change. I can't say, okay, fine, I'll take this business, I'll take out this entrepreneur, I'll put somebody else in and build up the business, right? I'm basically backing you. So what am I looking in you as a person? And these are some of the things that, and every investor will have a different list of things. By the way, so I'm not saying this is only one, Chaitanya sitting over there, the family office of Harsh Bhai, he may have a different list, right? So I think there's a different list but the ones that sort of come to mind for me personally is that what is the passion that you have for your idea? Can you articulate that clearly, right? When you're presenting to me, can you really, really say that, day in, day out, that's all I'm thinking about and how I'm thinking of building the business. So, why are you doing what you're doing, what are you doing and so on, right? The second is, from the passion, automatically comes this ability to motivate. If you are really passionate about what you're doing, right, you'll be able to sell. Because the passion comes through in selling. You may not be a great salesperson, which is why I don't use the word, the first word is motivate. The first word is not sell. Right? Motivation is what drives people to be your champion. If you can get a customer, if you can get an individual at a customer to be your champion, that is what matters. Right? People buy from people. People don't buy from companies. So fundamentally, it is the salesperson that goes in, it's you that go in, that convinces someone that you should buy from me. Right? So that particularly at the scale that we are all at, right? That this is what matters. The third is, and by the way, on motivation, it is not just motivation that relates to selling to customers, but it's also motivation relating to selling to employees. Employees have options. They've chosen to work for you. They can go somewhere else. So you have to find a way to keep them motivated on an ongoing basis. And many times that motivation is much beyond the salary you pay them. Right? People are always looking for a mission for what they do. And particularly what I'm seeing with our portfolio companies, where we are, there's a lot of technology people in our organizations, people start leaving after 5 or 6 months. And so you ask the question, why are you leaving? My learning curve is finished. I'm not learning anything anymore. First 5-6 months, when you're learning, you're going to apply that for the next 5-6 months, for whatever. So I'm not here to just be a university for you to learn. I'm teaching you the first 5-6 months for you to apply it going forward. But that employee is saying, oh, I've learned everything there is to learn over here, my learning curve is over, I'm going somewhere else to learn again. So these are the kind of challenges that we are seeing in the next generation of 20-somethings coming out of IITs and NITs and all that stuff. It's like life is about learning. No, life is not about learning, right? Life is about having impact. So you have to change that mindset in a lot of the youngsters to say it's not about learning, it's about having impact. And so you have to get them to that next stage of saying, how is the company having impact? How are you as an individual having impact within the company? So that's a very important thing from that standpoint. Third and fourth I would combine is basically listening skills. So when we are actually talking to entrepreneurs, we'll throw in random questions. It's not necessarily for the answer that you give us. It's whether have you listened to the question that I've asked? Are you alert to what? And many times I've heard entrepreneurs who've gone to other pitches. I'm sure they're saying this about us as well. The guy didn't get what I was saying. You ask such stupid questions. So I've heard them say this about the other VCs. So I'm sure they're saying this about me to somebody else, right? But we do that on purpose. The idea is, are you, people get really, really worked up in meetings if you ask a random question. Why? For that reason. They're saying, why are you asking this random question? Didn't you get what I just told you 15 minutes for the last 15 minutes? We're saying, no, that's not the point. The point is, how do you react to that question? Are you listening? Are you thinking about why am I asking the question? Are you stepping back? You all have to say, if I have sort of asked you a random question that you've already answered in the first 15 minutes, you just have to say, hey, I just answered this, but if you didn't get that, let me just repeat it. Right? So that notion of being adaptable, having your ears to the ground is very important. And that ties back to the fact that, as an entrepreneur, you're caught up in doing 20 things at the same time, but you always have to be listening. What is the competition doing? What does the market want? Where are my employees going next, right? That antenna has to be always on. So as a senior, sort of as a founder and so on, you have 20 antennas going on at the same time. So that's what we are testing. In some cases, relevant experience matters, particularly if you're doing, if you're going to set up the next Tesla, you need to understand how to, build an electric car. So, there's some value to that. Although, Elon Musk has shown that he didn't know anything about space when he created SpaceX, right? So, it doesn't always matter, but relevant experience does matter sometimes. And finally, perseverance. So, obviously, when you're coming and pitching to an investor, you have to show the ability that in your past, in whatever way that you can, that you have persevered through tough times. Because, this is a journey that we'll end up doing for multiple years. And if you start failing and start sort of losing hope, whenever the first sort of bump that you hit, it's not going to work. So I think that's those are the sort of key things. In terms of valuations, it's an art, it's not a science. It's a function of both your past results and your future potential. That's very important. And the reason why that question was asked about future potential, right? Why is that important? So, if I'm in the business and I'm growing, say, 5% year on year, and I'm doing 100 crores in revenue, correct? So that's one business that's going 100 crores, 5% year on year. So after 10 years, it's a business of, say, 150, 170 crores. I have another business that's doing 50 crores this year, or even 20 crores, but it's growing 50% year on year, or 100% year on year. Which do you think will end up getting a higher valuation? the second business, right? Because when I'm looking at on a 7-10 year horizon, I see that that business will get to 500 crore revenue, whereas the first business will get to 170 crore revenue. So going back to this question about how do I evaluate a company that is, where there is lack of clarity as to where the business will go, you're always sort of working with this mindset, what is the end state that this business can get to? What is the future potential? That's a very critical fact in how we look at. There is some value that is given to market leadership. If you have market leadership, which means that you've shown an ability to understand the market, to build a product that is relevant for it. So there is value given to that. So Flipkart, for example, has a much higher valuation than a Snapdeal or a Shophouse, right? For that reason. And then finally, liquidity has a premium on valuation. So typically a company that is larger will have a higher valuation, sort of neck to neck with a company that's a lower valuation. I'll pass this one on. I'll just talk briefly about this in terms of expectations, and I think this is the last time. Yeah? So you can think about because you are in different stages of your cycle, as we sort of looked at the first slide on where people are. As I've sort of broken it into 4 different types of investors that are prevalent in the Indian market right now. This is outside of debt, by the way. So the first one are angel investors, and so angel investors in India will typically write checks anywhere between 10 lakhs to a crore. Some of the super angels are writing larger checks, but I really think of super angels in the family office bucket rather than as a angel. And so if you look at angels, angels in India are typically looking at a 2 to 3 year cycle in which the company scales to a certain level, and then they flip their stake to an investor like us coming in, or if a company is sold or whatever else, so that they have the capital freed up to make the next investment. So they are basically working on a 2 to 3 year cycle to keep recycling their investments. So that's how you have to look at an angel investor. The VCs that are investing in us, like us, investing in Series A and B, are looking at a 5 to 7 year horizon in that business to get to liquidity. And you're typically expecting a 25 to 30% IRR. Obviously want higher, but that's where you sort of end up. And liquidity for us would be through a strategic sale or through an IPO. If you look at the PE growth investors, they have shorter life cycle funds. Their funds are typically 7 year funds. VC funds are 10 year funds. And so they have a shorter period, could be a 3 to 5 year horizon. And they have a slightly lower threshold on returns. And then finally, the family offices and some large HNIs, as I mentioned, I've seen an interesting behavior that in some cases they are even open to dividend models. So they're not looking at an exit necessarily. They're saying if you can build a business which is scaling and so on, and you're paying us dividend, that's fine. It's effectively a higher yield asset class for them.
Should we take a few questions?
Sure.
Before we wrap?
Any other questions? I've been answering questions along the way, but yeah.
I have a perception, an apprehension that an investor is also like a tiger riding on a back, riding on a back of a tiger. So we've seen examples in our industry, in the infrastructure industry, that you get very rosy pictures of growth in a cycle, growing cycle, and you're not able to meet those targets 4 years down the line, and the investor wants to cash out, and the equities converted to debt, and so on and so forth. And so the investor should be willing to work with you even in downside. Is that a possibility, or that's really?
Yeah, so I think that sort of goes back to the point I brought up at the start. How do you think about taking investments into the company? And obviously, when you took the investment, there was a certain assumptions that were put into place, and those assumptions may not have panned out. Regulatory frameworks changed. In the infrastructure case, land acquisition may be an issue or whatever else. So that issue has, will investors work with you? If they can, then most of them will. And I put that if they can with a caveat, because investors are also managing somebody else's money, particularly investors like us. Right? We are managing money from various foundations and US universities, sovereign funds, and so on. And so we have fiduciary responsibility to our investors as well. So in some cases, if there is a feeling that our value can be extracted from the business, we will try and do that. Now, obviously, in most cases, those will be at the expense of the entrepreneur. Right? So it's very important, therefore, to find the right investor to partner with you from that start. So that's why I brought up that question about when you get a co-founder, do you think about what would you do if things went wrong? Right? It's the same thing about investors. So when you talk to your initial, when you are going through the fundraising cycle and so on, you should ask the person. It's a tough discussion to have, but it's upfront that what would you do if I don't meet my numbers? And it's not my fault. So obviously, if it is your fault, if you didn't do the right things, you went to sleep at the wheel, that's different. But that question should be asked that we are in this industry where there is a regulatory risk. What happens if that regulatory risk comes true and we can't grow as fast as we have projected? So normally what you would want to do is in the business planning exercise that I mentioned, right? In the diligence phase, you would actually outline those risks. You say, here's the business plan and here are the assumptions against the business plan. And those assumptions have to be true. So you have to, Mr. Investor, you have to believe those assumptions as much as I believe them. So when 4 years later, you get into this pickle where the guy says, hey, I want to get out, I'm turning this into debt or whatever else. You say, no, but guess what? We had this discussion, we all agreed on the assumptions. 3 of these assumptions did not work out, none of them were my fault. So why should I be paying for them? So that's the, I would say the only option that when you go and be as clear as possible and find the investor that you feel, okay, this person will work with me in downturns. We are doing it right now. Snapdeal at one point was, you read the papers, it was valued at 5.6 billion. Then it went to a point where people were, trying to buy it dirt cheap. And we said, no, we'll work with Kunal and Rohit and, scale it up again, right? And they're doing that now. So it varies. Again, it depends that what is the discussion you have with the entrepreneur and the investor at the start.
In a family-oriented business, so there are 2 generations that are typically working. All right, the business was started by the older generation, and the younger generation is coming. So the in the life cycle, the business is quite old, but it's not getting the kind of returns that it should be getting. So in this situation, if somebody's looking at the younger generation or the older generation is looking for some funding or external influx of money to help it grow, how does the investor look at this organization?
Yeah. Some of the toughest investment decisions to look at these family businesses, but there are actually funds that are focusing on this. There are some of the mid-stage private equity funds. There's, for example, Lighthouse Capital and a few others that are looking at mid-sized companies and saying, what is the juice here, right? To your point, so you are basically saying, okay, here is a company that has 100 customers and is just doing 150, 200 crores, whatever in revenue that they're doing, right? How can I take that 100 customers and make it into 1,000 customers? They may not have chosen to build a large sales force because a sales force costs money. And again, to the gentleman in the back, the question that was asked is, you are making investments at the start and you're not sure when the returns will come in what form. So an equity investor is taking that risk with you, right? So if you go back and say, okay, here are the assets that my forefathers built. This is the company that they built, and these are the assets that were built. Now I'm going to take these assets, and I'm going to add these 3 other things. Could be, I'm bringing a professional sales force. Could be, I'm bringing a technology platform that does not exist today. Could be that I'm adding a new product line that can serve the existing customers that are not being served by that by us right now, right? So there could be different things. And then you are convincing that guy that, right now I'm doing 200 crores, if I do this, it'll become 2,000 crores. But I need the initial 100 crores to scale it up. So that's the thought process that works in that case. The biggest challenge, I will tell you, is as an investor, I'm saying, you're a young guy, you're going to build this business, but every time you're sitting at home at dinner, your dad and your Tauji and your Baba are telling you, how do I make sure that, how do I screw the investor? Because that generation has never had professional investors on board. Right now, there's a good friend of mine that runs a real estate business. He says he went out to raise money. And the first discussion that happened at the dinner table was, how do we make sure that they don't get the returns at the end of the day? He was honest enough to have the discussion with me. Okay, what should I do in this case? Because the entry point is, how do I screw the investor? It's unfortunate. But there is that mindset that exists, and we have seen that mindset. I have personally been in situations where the earlier generation found ways to extract money from the business without the investors seeing the return. Because that's how, earlier times business was done. So it's a challenge for the younger generation and family-run businesses, that they are trying to sort of get out of that mindset. They don't think that way. You are doing everything that I outlined in terms of bringing a partner on board, but the partner is wary because of prior generations involvement. So it's unfortunate, but it's partly a question of saying, okay, how am I going to separate myself from that influence? It's very tough. Getting that investor to meet your father, grandfather, and say, okay, how are you thinking about the business? And that may be a way to convince us. So last question, I think we
very last question.
Yeah.
In an ideal scenario, what is the percentage of a company share that you're looking at? As in seller, how much should I give up in the first place?
Yeah, so it depends again from investor to investor. Professional investors typically are looking at, say, a 20% ownership in the company. They want to get to that ownership. In some cases, that ownership may start at a lower number initially because you don't want to dilute as much. So you say, okay, at this valuation, I'll only take this much money, and I'll give 10% of the company. But if I grow this business, I agree to take an additional amount from you at a higher valuation to let you to get to 20%. And the reason why it's not a hard and fast rule, but a 20% threshold at an early stage business is because the exits aren't that large, let's say. So 20%, you need, if I'm spending time on the business, I need to see a potential exit. As the companies grow larger, there is more openness to taking a lower stake because that stake itself could be worth a lot more. And so people at PE growth stage will do as low as, you probably read this, KKR will take 4% in Hero, right? So it goes to that stage. But 10 to 12% ownership and so on. There are guys who are taking, I know angel funds who work with very early stage companies that end up owning 35%. But then they are literally working with that company in a sort of incubation type model. They're kicking me out.